Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for logging in this morning. We appreciate you making some time to be with us. And the general assumption, of course, is these days that everybody's at home somewhere. So hopefully you're comfortable. You've got your coffee or your juice or whatever it is, and we can provide you with some interesting information over the next 60 minutes. Let's walk through the agenda to understand what we promise to deliver and make sure you keep us to task. So first one is we believe it's really important to apply a strategy to this process, not just simply taking what was a face-to-face event or an in-person event and just simply throwing it into a webinar, because that's probably not going to deliver the best possible outcome. So Adrian will walk us through that and explain a little bit more about that concept and how we believe a good strategy is going to make a significant difference to what you're wanting to do. I'll then dive into the actual planning of the webinar, looking at some of the considerations to think about, and also outline how Eloqua specifically can help you achieve that. Today, we're going to showcase a little bit about the Zoom integration, but we'll also touch on 24, which some of you may also be using. Fundamentally, what we describe, especially for the Zoom integration, is pretty generic across your go-to webinars, WebExes, ReadyTalk platforms, etc. So if you're not using Zoom or you're not using On24, I think you'll still get some good information from today's webinar. Then what we'll do is use a Q&A to finish off the session today. So on the line today, you've got myself, Derek Bell. I'm the Director of Customer Success and Marketing at Marketing Cube, and our CEO and co-founder, Adrian Jones, will also be with us. And what we like to call, or who we like to call our Q&A genius, Jason O'Donnell, is standing by to manage the Q&A area of the platform as well. So please make sure you do that. And what's happening? So look, essentially over the next hour, as I said, Adrian will begin the process and talk about that strategic thinking. We'll then do a little bit of Q&A at the end of that. We'll then dive into tips for webinar presenters, looking at some of the physical things that you may want to have in place to really help you get more out of that. And then also some examples of how Eloqua can help you do that. And then again, we'll focus on a Q&A. Housekeeping is always important with any of these types of webinars, just so that you're crystal clear, excuse me, with what's actually going on. So all attendees will be able to access the Q&A today. And you'll also be able to look at what other people are asking. And if they're asking questions that you like, well, you can upvote those questions as well, which will help us shape a little bit of that Q&A session as well. We will present you with a couple of polls as well. So we're curious to understand your feelings about where you're at in relation to this process of moving your face-to-face events online. And just be aware that all lines are currently muted at the moment, just with the number of people that we have on the webinar. It gets a bit unruly, but if it's easier, we can certainly unmute you if you do have a specific question that you'd like to ask as we get to the Q&A sessions.
I suppose our focus today is moving events online, and they might previously have been planned to be face-to-face, and there might be events that you typically ran face-to-face, or it might be something new that you see as a new opportunity or a channel, a necessity as a face-to-face, as a virtual event. But I wanted to start really with clarifying some terminology and how we're going to be using it. Like all technology terms, online event terms are used interchangeably, and this can cause a little bit of confusion. So we group virtual event types into kind of these broad bands, if you like. So a web meeting, and I'm sure you've been having a lot of these recently, are just your typical meetings. A face-to-face equivalent would be in a meeting room, normally not less than 100 participants, a couple of people running the meeting, maybe up to 5, but it's really a web meeting. And so everybody can share their screen, everyone can interact. We'll have a look at what that looks like, but I'm sure you're familiar with it. And the next level up is a webinar. And this is one where the hosts get a little bit more control. And some of the stuff that Derek's been using already, like putting all participants on mute, being able to present, having images of the presenter, those types of things. But generally, we're talking about less than 1,000 participants. You can go up a level from there again to a webcast, which is more, I think of it more as a launch, and it's almost like a TV show. You have a fewer number of hosts, but that's really going to a broad global audience. So it's much more structured. It's really sometimes even pre-recorded or a hybrid of pre-recordings. But really, that's kind of a webcast. And then you've got a virtual conference. I'll show you what that looks like in a second, but it's more of what you might do if you had like a university open day, or a conference that you might normally have had in a conference center, and putting that into a virtual world. So it's creating that experience. And you might have lots of hosts, lots of breakout rooms, and lots of participants. So let's have a quick look at what they kind of look like on screen, just so we're all clear. So a web meeting, and you might use Zoom for this, for example, there, or others, even your Google equivalents, Hangouts, where you've just got, you've got the ability just to have that meeting. And this is your webinar experience. So you can see here, you've got, you might have a group of hosts or a video of just a presenter. You've got some controls. You've got chat and Q&A, so you can see those buttons down at the bottom where you can participate, and you've got some level of interaction. Going up from there, your webcast, again, more of a presentation, more speaker, more resources online. So you might be able to have some things to download that are available. And this is really more streaming and more interactivity buttons as well. So you can have polls, and you might have a live Twitter feed of the webcast going on, so people can put their input and share, and also see what's going on with those resources, or ask a question, within that interface. So a bit more branding capability, those types of things. So more of a TV show like production. And then if we go to kind of that virtual conference type capability, then we can see that we're adding some additional color to the screen and the experience. And you're also getting, that conference type feel where you've got like an exhibition. You might have rooms that you go into then for group chat, or you might schedule webinars in each of the different rooms, like a breakout room, and then have the opportunity to go to things like resource libraries, or one-on-one chat sessions, or meet somebody, or some network building. So that kind of virtual conference experience. So these can get quite sophisticated. You can go up another level and almost have gamification, where you have an avatar, that a host that greets you, an avatar that you walk around and explore. But it's kind of, I suppose that's going a little bit kind of even beyond this into sort of a virtual world. So that's probably at the extreme end. I think most of our clients are kind of looking at, okay, what happens when we want to run more than one web meeting at a time? And importantly, I think the experience is, how do you then go back to a central location to get everybody back together again? So, if you think about it, you would normally go to a breakout room, then come back into the auditorium, maybe have a look at what you're going to do next, then go to your next scheduled meeting, then come back again. So it's like, how do you connect those things together? And importantly, I think what also is happening is you're also running, your events are running sort of in three stages. So the first is the kind of that invitation and getting people there. Then the next is the live event and running your day live the way that you would do if you're having your conference, and then accessing the resources that you would see after the event. But obviously, because you're not running that event live, you're looking at the three digital experiences, if you like, the run up and what's on, the actual event live itself, and then the post event. But you need to make them look and feel different online and as a digital experience. So that's kind of the challenge around how do you set that up and how do you run that. So let's have a look at the strategy though, and kind of how that and how we might apply that to our events. So this is our design for automation framework, and you may have seen this already if you've been working with Marketing Cube for a while, but it's essentially designed to connect your marketing strategy with your marketing technology. So in this case, primarily, how do we connect to Eloqua's capabilities and to our webinar or our web meeting or our web conference technology in the best way? And this enables you to enhance your execution and create much better and more unique customer experiences that ultimately link back to your branding and your marketing goals. So we want to draw a straight line, I guess, between what we're doing with our marketing automation and how that's helping to achieve our marketing goals ultimately. And all these components come together to provide, in this case, a webinar or a web conference brief that you can then execute in-house, externally, or a blend of the two, depending. You might want to create a template that is reusable for webinars and conferences moving forward, that uses technology to create that customer experience that you're looking to deliver, that's on brand every time. let's break that down a little bit then. So let's start, and we start with the strategy, or it starts with the strategy, which is really what's the purpose and the objective of your webinar. And this will link ultimately back to an overarching marketing initiative, which would have some KPI and some objectives. So we really need to think about that clearly in terms of why are we running this? What are we looking to achieve? And how does this help us to achieve our overall marketing goals? Which marketing initiatives does this play into? And what impact are we expecting this to have against that? And then how might we measure it? So we're looking for those desired, I guess, our marketing outcomes. So that helps us to clearly define the why we're doing it. And we need to think about this, and this may have changed, right? From the face-to-face event that we were planning, has that changed in any way? Has that recently changed due to the current situation? And then how does that change our strategy for this particular event? So that's kind of the key place to start. Once you've got that defined, start to think about our customer insights and data, but also our audience. So this is thinking deeply about who it is that we're trying to get to, what's their current situation, what do we know about them already, and what would we like to find out about them, either before the event, so during that event registration process or the invitation process, during the event itself. So can we capture information during the event? So polls as an example, or resources that they might look at, or after the event, where they might go, people might come back and look at replays, or you might send more information out, and you might capture or want to capture some more information about them. So all of this is really about personalizing and providing more relevant and timely communications. And so understanding, what your audience is interested in, and where they are at and what they're doing helps you to do that. And so this is so really moving. One of the key differences between virtual event and a real world event or a face-to-face event is that you can capture a lot more data. So we need to think carefully about what you're able to collect, and what you'll do with it. But also what you already know and how you can personalize the experience as a result of that. Another consideration is scale. So obviously with a webinar, you're not limited by the location, the room size, catering budgets, all those sorts of things. So this also adds, a webinar can be much larger, but then you also need to think about some considerations like time zones, languages, and how you're going to manage those numbers. So you can still have very personalized, smaller events online, and that opens up opportunities to do more Q&A. You know who's going to be there. You can have more one-to-one type conversations when you're doing it. If you have a webinar, you invite and you have 500 people come along, you're not going to get that same feeling. You're not going to be able to address it the same way. You're going to have to manage that webinar in a different way than if you've got small groups. So again, you've got to kind of think about some of those considerations, and especially then if you've got time zones or languages coming in, maybe people are going to register, but they're going to be mainly focused on getting the recording. They're not going to be getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch your webinar. So, just thinking through some of those considerations and understanding your audience, where they're at, and really why they're coming along. The big potential loser in online and virtual events is actually collaboration and social networking, which you would normally do at an event. So you'd bump into people, go to a room, and you might have an opportunity to do some networking and meet some people. And platforms do try to provide some of these as online opportunities, using social media and the ability to do things like this Q&A and the opportunity to meet, to meet people and other attendees. But it's some compensation, but obviously that's the piece that you're missing out on. So you've got to work really hard, I guess, on driving that within your event, if that's an important component of what you're trying to deliver. So let's go on to the customer journey. So once we understand our audience and who's attending, the next thing to understand is really what their goals are. So we do this by looking at it in the context of the customer journey and thinking, okay, so for this particular event, where is that audience? Where are they in their customer journey? And how does that help us to meet our overall marketing strategy or our overall webinar objectives. You might want to revisit your personas and have a look at key messages and key objectives for that persona in that customer stage. That'll help you to define some of the content. And also, it's important to understand the coordination of this event with other channels and touch points. So what I mean by that is, where are people coming from to attend the event or to find out about the event, or to register for the event, and where would you like them to go next? And are there any other channels that will be interacting, as well as your webinar, and that will be interacting with this particular customer journey? So they might be have an opportunity to go off to a call center for some assistance, or you might want to be alerting sales, or we might be coordinating this with some SMS and some online media prior to the event. So it's just thinking about how all these things are going to fit together to build our customer experience, and thinking about their challenges and objections to that, and how can we make this more seamless, make it easier, and make it more relevant and timely. So I'm going to skip over the experience planning because we kind of come back to that, but the next step is really the content planning. So this really is looking at your content strategy. And so once you've defined your topic and the event flow, you're going to sort of map your content. You might already have your content mapped out based on your customer journey. But we're going to be looking at really what's the best and most topical, most compelling content that we have to help us achieve our objectives. And if you're in a process of migrating what was a physical event previously, or was planned originally as a physical event, or has been delivered as a physical event in the past, and moving that into an online or virtual experience, then you need to think about the changes that you might make to the format. And typically people's attention spans are a little bit shorter. They haven't got as much entertainment or breaks for food and drinks and all those sorts of things. So you're probably going to need to think about how you break that down. What we're finding with a lot of our webinars, a lot of the things that we're moving online, is that people take there's a shorter amount of time, but people are prepared to do some more pre-work and homework and preparation, and probably do some more work afterwards, post the event as well. So that puts a little bit more weight on the planning and the preparation for the event. You actually run the webinar, and then also think about how are you going to keep that engagement post the event, and then help people to achieve their original webinar objectives, if you like, post the event as well. So think about replays and the content. One of the things that webinars do, if you record them, is provide you with an asset that is reusable and available on demand. So again, there's some planning around how you want to position your replays, what replays you want to build. Will you break them up into sections to deliver them in a different way? How long will they last? When will they be out of date? When will you do a new one? So just thinking about those resources is important, and any other post-event resources that you might put together, guides or tutorials or whatever it might be, that might be appropriate. So we're finally ready then to start to design the experience itself. So we've kind of got all of those core steps in place. And so now we can really look at what the experience will be that we're delivering. And I'll get Derek's going to go through the practicalities and how we work through this, particularly with Zoom and with Eloqua, and touch on On24 as well. But essentially, you've got these steps, which is the segmentation, which is building your initial audience, sending out those invitations of promoting the event, ultimately driving registrations, which then have some reminders so that people know where to come and what time and all the details and the links and all the sorts of things that get lost, the delivery of the webinar itself and how that's going to work, and then the post webinar comms and replay. So that's the kind of the webinar experience. And the same thing, if you're running a conference, it would be the same thing. You just basically scaling that up to multiple webinars. And last but not least is the measuring success. And I think this is really key component is to make sure you're asking the right questions at the point of registration that provide you with the reporting that you kind of need at the end. So if you have those KPIs and objectives clearly defined, then you know what you want to measure, how you might want to categorize it, for example. And so you're asking those questions so that you've got the ability to do that at the end of the webinar. And I think you need to go beyond, how many registrants, participants, how many registrants do we have, and how many people turned up, and how long did they stay? It's really thinking about, can we get some insights around whether they then went on to do what we hoped they would? Did we lift our level of engagement? Do other people in the organization need to know, how can we help to deliver on those KPIs and objectives of that we originally defined in the strategy piece? Cool. So that's really a little bit about the strategy and a framework that might use to build that out. So just checking to see if there are any questions at this point. Happy to answer any there might be.
Yeah, so we've got a question here from Malcolm in relation to the Zoom app. So the challenge that he's identified with the app, and I believe this could potentially be a limitation, we need to explore it in a bit more detail. But if you're running a single instance of Eloqua, but in large organizations, you might have separate Zoom accounts with multiple users across different geographies, is the ability to have that Zoom app actually identify multiple accounts. So I don't believe that Zoom has that functionality. The WebEx app, for example, allows the Eloqua user, who is also a WebEx user with their own login and user account, to actually add those unique credentials to the app within the back of the platform, whereas there's no functionality with the Zoom app to actually do that. So I'm going to take that question away because I don't specifically have an answer for it. So I'm going to take that one away and see if we can find an answer with our friends at Zoom. So that the app that is used was developed by Zoom and is made available for free to Eloqua users through the cloud store or the cloud marketplace. So we'll have to come back to that one. Sorry about that, Malcolm, but we'll research and see what we can find for you. Alrighty, all right. Well, let's dive into the next section. Was looking at specifically at some of those platforms that we just talked about. So there are a range of different platforms that have existing apps that enable you to connect to Eloqua. The nice thing about these apps is they obviously speed that process for you. It doesn't mean that you need to start building API connectors or anything like that. It's kind of all done for you. Now, of course, you may have a different platform to the ones that are on the screen, and these platforms are all cloud-based, which would generally imply they're hopefully got open APIs. And if that's the case, then well, absolutely, they could be integrated with Eloqua as well. You just need to work out the cost-benefit analysis, I suppose, or ratio in relation to ditching that platform and moving to one of these, or investing the money to build something that would connect those two platforms together. But you've got a range of ways to get people to register, and this is really the starting point of any of your webinars. It's obviously you need to get people to fill in the form, and some of you today will have registered because you saw an advertisement that we ran on LinkedIn. And so you've seen that, you've had that LinkedIn experience, you fill in that form, and that information has come through into Eloqua onto the campaign canvas. And from there, we've used the Zoom connector in this instance to then actually register you with Zoom and used Eloqua to send you the confirmation email. So that's just one way to do it. Another way to do it is to provide people with the Zoom registration page. So again, WebEx, ReadyTalk, all of the different webinar platform providers do this. They provide you with the ability to upload aspects of your branding. So you can see here, it's quite rudimentary. We've been able to add a banner. We can see we've got the logo listed there as well, and obviously a description and a form that you can use. So that's one way to do it. And even if people register in this example through the Zoom registration page, that information can automatically flow into Eloqua as well, directly to the campaign canvas, using one of the app feeders that sit on the campaign canvas. Another way, and this is the way most of you will have registered, actually everybody will have registered today, you would have reached this page. And so this page gives you the chance to understand what's going on. You can see there's much more branding. We can ask more questions, clarity around opt-in, help you understand who's presenting, etc. And just give you a little bit more information in relation to the event and what's going on, but give you more of a Marketing Cube branded experience than necessarily giving you a Zoom quasi Marketing Cube branded experience. So we'd always lean towards an Eloqua landing page before we would ever, I think we've ever used the Zoom interface. So two ways to get people to register for your event. Okay, there's a question here from Michelle. Are there other tools like the real-time polls we can use during webinars and conferences? Can tools like this also be embedded into Eloqua templates for invite comms? So, Michelle, the use of polls is probably one of the most common ones. The Q&A capability that you've just used, for example, to ask that question, the Q&A versus the chat, right? So the Q&A enables us to expose those questions to everybody on the webinar. So then everybody else can have a look at those questions. And if they like that question, they can actually then upvote it as well. So it's kind of crowdsourcing and getting people to provide some feedback. Once you get into the other platforms like On24, now we don't profess to be experts, by the way, in either Zoom or On24 necessarily. They have a wide range of functions. The On24 platform certainly has, I think, a lot more functionality. And as an example, I'll share shortly with you about how one of our clients uses On24 today. But you might remember back to that screenshot that Adrian shared at the the On24 example. There are all those little boxes down the bottom of the screen. And that enabled Twitter. It enabled you to ask different types of questions. There's a whole range of functions that can be added to those.
Yeah, just going back to Michelle's question, I think the beauty of the polls that are actually in Zoom and in On24 is they collect all of that data, and then you can push that back into Eloqua. So you can collect that data and act on that data. And we can also build in polls and questions into registration landing pages or click-throughs from emails and call to action. So you can have gather the information before the event, if you wanted to find out more about your audience, or during the event, or you can also have polls or maybe something like a survey post the event as part of your communication. So you can make that, got that ability to kind of gather that information throughout. And then if you make the look and feel similar, then you're kind of delivering on that same experience throughout. Makes sense.
Alrighty, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, so the next part is planning your webinar. So the planning of the webinar is the pretty critical piece. And at the moment, that's the part that is proving to be a little bit of a challenge for us, right? Because we've had all these face-to-face events that we've got planned, and we're exactly the same. We had these different events planned throughout the year, and talking to hotels and venues, and then all of a sudden everything's having to move into Zoom, at least for the foreseeable future. So we've had to also look at ways to make changes to those events, and not just simply take an executive lunch and move it into to Zoom. That just doesn't work. So we've had to look at other ways to do that. So to help you from a preparation point of view, what we found is a bit of a process to go through. So let me walk you through that process. The first one is from a segmentation point of view and really building out your audience. If we're predisposed to looking at external systems and manually building lists, which are based purely on profile information and then just uploading those into Eloqua, that's a good starting point, but we're sort of missing an opportunity to really take advantage of all the digital body language and all the other information that Eloqua has, which will really help you hone that list. It may not be necessary that you need to invite 50 or 60 people. You may find that a far more targeted 20 people could deliver a much better outcome. The next step is then invitations and promotions, and you've got a range of ways to do that. Obviously, email for our Eloqua customers is the primary way to do that. But you've also got the ability, as I shared earlier, we ran some paid campaigns with LinkedIn to promote this particular webinar, and some people have registered through that process to reach and join us today. Cross-channel, multi-channel, all different ways for you to invite and promote people, or promote the event, I should say. Then the registration process is pretty critical. It's really important that people get the right information once they register, once they provide you with the details. It's really critical that they get exactly what they need in order to join the webinar with the right time zone information, the right link, their passwords. There probably should be passwords, all that kind of fun stuff. And then the reminders. So from an Eloqua build point of view, I find really your reminders are just a repeat of the registration email with some slight tweaks in language. It's the same information that you want to give to people each time you communicate with them. Then, of course, this is where we are today. We're in the webinar delivery mode. So it's getting everything ready for this experience to be as the best possible experience. But I like to call this one the poor country cousin sometimes, that the post-webinar comms and replays are sometimes forgotten or not treated as the gold mine that they potentially can be. So it's not just about simply putting a replay up. It's maybe also about a supporting, blog post. It may be a 2 or 3 page guide that goes with that information. So when people access the replay, maybe they get a PDF that sort of helps document things. Any way that you can add value to that process to sort of reinforce your message and who you are is certainly critical. So let's jump in and have a quick look at segmentation. And as I said, the notion of relying purely on a list mentality is doing yourself a disservice. You've got Eloqua to help you build out far more intelligent segments, utilizing both profile information as well as details around digital body language. And that's how you managed to get an invitation from us today. We also did some fairly strict profiling within LinkedIn to determine who would actually see the advertisements that saw those and then registered and came through. So a lot of thought goes into that. It's not just simply, okay, let's take all of our prospects and send, tens of thousands of people an invitation to a webinar. Let's be smart about that process. Same logic applies to customers, business partners, staff, maybe not so much. That's a finite number, so that you might have different geographies and time zone considerations potentially as well. So to speed the process from a build point of view, this is the email that most of you would have received in relation to attending today. And this is actually just a core template. Most of the content that you can see on that email is templated. The only aspects really that are unique are those that relate to Tuesday, the 21st of April. The bullet points, the opening comments, etc. Everything else is pretty much is a template. And so that process literally takes, could be as little as 5 to 10 minutes to produce the email. And I promise it takes longer to develop the content than the copy, but the actual build of the email is fairly quick when you take a more templated approach and delivering a much more on-brand experience versus, for instance, a Zoom experience. The registration and reminder process, the key thing here is just to make it as seamless and easy and as consistent as possible. So we try to certainly make sure that regardless of the webinars that we present to customers, whether it's our monthly user group for Eloqua users or webinars from a thought leadership point of view and modern marketing point of view, that process is pretty much the same. So utilizing Eloqua functions like pre-population of the forms, using progressive profiling to try and avoid asking the same questions again and again and again. Or if at least we are asking the same questions over and over, at least the form is pre-populating with those. So people just have to submit the button and it's kind of game over. So progressive profiling, a big part of that. Another way that you can improve the experience, and this is what you would need to do using the Eloqua assets to do the registration, is one-click registration. So one-click registration would mean I receive the email and potentially I've got 2 buttons. One is register me now. The other maybe is sorry, I can't make it. So they click on register me now, and then the next page they see is a confirmation saying, thank you, Derek, for registering. We've just sent you a confirmation email with the details that you need. So you've got to think through your audience and the appropriate nature of doing that, because you generally want to use these as opportunities to gather more information about a person. Therefore, you want to ask another question or two. So one-click registration may not be suitable for every single webinar that you run, but it's certainly a great option for some of your audiences. So something to think about. Then the other nice thing about using the Eloqua process is the ability to capture mobile phone numbers for SMS reminders. So at Marketing Cube, we don't use SMS as a marketing tool. We use it really for reminders for events, webinars, those sorts of things. The nice flip side to that is we probably have a massive proportion of our customers in our database, in our CRM, with a mobile phone number, which can be incredibly helpful in the process of engaging with them and having us support people, work with them, etc. It does make it a lot easier to liaise with a short SMS sometimes versus email or making phone calls. So a number of ways to think about that. And of course, the last point there is that all of that information can be captured and stored in and is accessible to the CRM users through Eloqua Profiler as well. So lots of advantages to using the Eloqua process versus potentially the webinar platform. Plus, I mean, Zoom's great, WebEx is great, but we don't need to be giving an example or using their branding to do your marketing. So one of the examples we wanted to share, I mentioned earlier, was a client of ours using On24. And for those in the professional services space, you'll be familiar with the CPD or continuing professional development courses that many firms offer to those within the industry. So in order to maintain professional standards and certifications, a certain number of CPD points need to be attained throughout the year. One of the nice things with the On24 product is it does have some very robust ways of authenticating who's actually logged in to join a webinar. And then at the end of that process, it's able to digitally issue certificates of attendance and also identify the number of points that that individual can then submit to their professional association to validate their CPD points. I have other clients who don't use On24 and spend too much time in Microsoft Word manually putting together these types of certificates, which are then PDF'd and then manually sent out one by one because they need to be named and all that sort of fun stuff and identified as who the recipient of the points is. Whereas this On24 solution just wraps that all up and automates the whole process. So enables our client to deliver great value to their customers from that process, but it also saves time and delivers a much better experience. The other key thing is to try and avoid death by PowerPoint. Now, personally, today you're experiencing Apple Keynote. I wouldn't give you PowerPoint in a pink fit. At the end of the day, you need to create something that is engaging and interesting. Sometimes simply taking slides that have been prepared for a face-to-face event won't necessarily always cut it from a webinar point of view. The nice thing about the face-to-face event is they have you. You're there standing in front of them. You're animated, you're engaging, you're able to maintain eye contact, all those sorts of things which can't be achieved, generally speaking, from a webinar point of view. So you want to make sure that slides are not overly static, that there's a decent refresh rate, etc., so that you can keep people engaged. Don't overdo the animation. Hopefully you haven't felt we've overdone the animation today, but the animation is there just to try and keep your eyeballs moving. The other key thing to do from a webinar point of view, you'll notice we did this today, is just to communicate the housekeeping, just so people are clear on what they're about to experience, the types of functions that are available to them. We talked about the Q&A, for instance, etc. All those sorts of things. You do the same thing in a face-to-face event. You'd ask people to turn their mobile phones off, etc. So it's really no different from a webinar point of view. Now, the next one, I can't underrate the value of this enough. When we started really doing the Eloqua user group 3+ years ago via webinar, I was kind of the lone wolf. And I found it quite distracting to be trying to manage the Q&A because it's a slightly different format as opposed to today's webinar. There were a lot more questions. People are asking more questions as it goes throughout. And so then I'd have to stop and pause, read the question, figure out what the person's asking. Meanwhile, everybody else is sitting there going, what is he doing, etc. So we learned very quickly that you need to sort of break out the roles. So there's the host, the person that's kind of facilitating the process, and so that's my role today, as well as being a presenter. Then we've got Adrian, who is obviously as a content expert, is one of our presenters, helping out as well. And then you'll see we have Jason helping from a Q&A and also helping manage that chat scenario as well. And so we found that that's about an ideal mix. Normally when we do the user group each month, it's just Jason and myself, and that works perfectly fine. But trying to do it by yourself is a challenge. The only other caveat I would add, guys, is normally you're all in a room together to do this. So normally it'd be Jason, Adrian, and I in a room. We'd be able to see and eyeball each other, etc. And then we found initially with being in 3 separate physical locations, being a little bit different, a different experience. So just get familiar with the platform and understand how your platform works so that you can make it a little bit more seamless for people. Now, if public speaking terrifies you, which I believe it's a ridiculous percentage of the population find public speaking terrifying, there are some options. So if you're in your team and you've been nominated as someone that has to present a webinar because that's what you do, and you're terrified at the notion of doing that, it's not necessary perhaps that you have to do it live. And Adrian talked earlier about On24 giving you a mix of both live broadcast and pre-recorded content. So Zoom enables you to do the same thing. You can present a video to people as well. So if you do have a team member that maybe their core strength is not standing in front of 1,000 people, or they feel terrified at the idea of speaking live in an event like this, work with them. There are solutions that can easily accommodate them, helping them deliver their expertise in a way that's a bit more comfortable for them as well. Now, most of the different platforms will also provide you with the ability to do some streaming. So Zoom out of the box, you can see the screenshot there from Zoom, enabling you to go to Facebook Live and also YouTube Live as well. My only caveat there would be just think through the content and the potential audience, because once you go onto Facebook Live, I mean, you could have Donald Trump sitting there in the White House watching. So you could really have anybody participating. You may also want to think about having your social media community managers online on Facebook ready to take Q&A should there be comments or questions that come up during the Facebook experience. And the same would also apply for YouTube as well. So you can see those different roles of people becomes a little bit more broad. The post-webinar comms, that poor country cousin that we talked about, as we know, a lot of people like to, especially in our part of the world here in Australia, New Zealand, and our Asian colleagues as well, when things are happening in Europe and North America, we're usually in better sleep. So many of us will register for these things in anticipation of the replay. So think that through. It does take time to edit and slice and dice your video content once it's finished. You'll want to put some branding on it, I'm sure, and work out where you're going to host it. Potentially, we'd encourage you to look at that ending up on an Eloqua landing page so you can control that branding experience a little bit better. But and then there's also the data you capture. Sometimes it's good to think about a blog post at the end as well, because if you're asking poll, you can take those poll results potentially and turn them into nice graphs and use those as some content to share back to people through blog posts as well. So there's a range of ways to use that data. The recording of the webinar is pretty critical. We pretty much record everything and then work out what we want to do with it. The regular user group that we run on a monthly basis, we have a splash page where we don't have every single webinar, but the more popular replays that are accessed then get put onto this page. That's an Eloqua landing page. And it's really just a summary or a splash page, really, more than anything else, that just gives access to about, I think it's 12 or so different replays that people can get to. So click on any of those, you'll then have to go through a form in order to get to the replay. And then there's the blog post that matches and all that sort of fun stuff as well. With all of the platforms, they typically provide you with the ability to either store your recording in their cloud, or you can download it to your device. Just be aware that with most of the platforms, the storage costs are not generally included in the subscription. For your larger corporate users, maybe that was negotiated, but just be aware, don't assume that there's no cost involved. We discovered that through a fairly hefty bill from a previous webinar provider. The other key thing to think about is audio quality. Simply using your laptop generally won't cut it. The good thing about audio quality is that it's not expensive. You can find a great microphone, and actually mine is number 2 on that list right there. It's the Samson Meteor. So the Samson Meteor, I think you can get JB Hi-Fi for about, I think it was under $100. I want to say like $95 from JB Hi-Fi. And it's a USB mic plugged straight into desktop or laptop, and just improves the overall quality of the audio, which is something critical for webinars. You want to make sure that people can easily hear you. Then, of course, that branding experience, we sort of just going back, most of the platforms, I showed you this screenshot before, but in this context, it's just to reinforce that most of those platform providers, whether it's Zoom or ReadyTalk or Cisco, etc., will all provide you with the ability to do some type of branding that you can see right here. Now, the question that was asked earlier by Malcolm was to understand, how do we use Zoom? And so for those who are on the call today and are Eloqua users, what we wanted to try and show you was how we do this on the Eloqua campaign canvas. But I thought, first of all, it's probably worthwhile understanding the number of assets that we use in order to do this each month. And I like to tell people that the user group is templated to within an inch of its life. So I could be hit by a bus and someone should really be able to pick it up fairly easily. So we create the Zoom webinar, obviously. Sometimes we'll add some polls to that Zoom account. Now we start to move into Eloqua. We have two campaign canvases. We have 2 landing pages. We have 6 Eloqua emails that are involved in the whole process. Now, 3 of those are invitations. Any one individual will only get 2 invitations, but 3 is what's built. There's 1 confirmation email. Those confirmation emails are then repurposed and turned into 2 reminders, one usually a few days before and then one about an hour before. We have 1 Eloqua form and 2 shared lists and 1 SMS that is written and prepared. So let's have a close look now at the Eloqua campaign canvas and understand exactly what that looks like. All right. So we begin the process looking at our segments. You can see at the top of the screen there. So we have customers. We then use some of the Eloqua apps as the contact washing machine, compare dates to understand the context of when things are going out. And so that's when the first invitation is issued. We then wait for a period of time. We then get very close to when the event is actually happening. We then start to interrogate to understand who opened the first invitation. And this is where the second or third invitation comes in. But look, before I leave that and go further down the canvas, just wanted to reiterate to you the ability for a little bit more cross-channel, multi-channel. So in this example for today's webinar, some of you will have filled in the LinkedIn lead gen form. So that lead gen form came in directly here onto the campaign canvas, and then the webinar confirmation email was sent. And you can do the same thing with the Facebook lead ads feeder as well. So they're paid for campaigns. You've got to part with some money with Microsoft, with LinkedIn and Facebook to do that. But we found that quite a productive way to do, very targeted and not the cheapest of options, but we do find the value and the quality of those leads coming in really good. So that's an upside. People have now registered. They come in from a form. Now you can see this is where one of the Zoom elements comes into play. So this is the Zoom app. So what happens here is we add the unique ID from the webinar platform. It goes off, registers you with Zoom, comes back, and then we send you the confirmation email. And then as people begin to progress through that process, they'll get that confirmation email. We use shared lists, again, checking on times, etc. Then there's a reminder email to people. So again, that's pretty much the same as the confirmation email, but just slightly edited. And as that page scrolls down, we're now getting to the day. So again, we query the shared list, which everyone goes into from when they submit the form. Did they ask for an SMS? If they did, just want to make sure we have a mobile phone number. Then we send them the SMS, and then everybody receives the actual email as well, because the email contains the links to join the webinar. And then we do post-event stuff as well to understand who attended, who didn't, all that sort of fun stuff. There's a question here from Kath. Do you register people as attended no matter how long they were logged in to watch? Good question, Kath. Yes, we do at this stage. I generally take a closer look at the actual minutes logged in. Sometimes it can be a little bit unreliable because, for instance, when you look at the actual raw data out at the back end of Zoom, I might see, let's say I see Kath, and Kath logged in and she was only logged in for 2 minutes. But then if I look further down, there's another Kath, same Kath, by the way, who was on for 59 minutes. So that just tells me that there must have been, a connection issue or something. So Kath logged in, then somehow it got logged off, etc. So relying purely on the data from an automation point of view to say who attended, who didn't, and then applying a threshold can get a little bit fuzzy. So I rather look at that data, and then I inform Eloqua as to what attended means. Now that doesn't always scale that well across larger organizations with many types of webinars, but it's something that we can have a look at and figure out. Hopefully that answers your question.
Derek, I think on 24 we give you some more options with regards to bringing that different data, those different data sets in. and then
Nice.
making automated decisions around what you'd like to be able to count as registered or attended or not, and what follow-up comms you might want to send as a result.
Yeah, because I do see that occasionally. I'll see a person who I know attends regularly, and it might be 2 minutes, but then I look further down and they're on for 58 minutes. So it just shows me that they always got disconnected for some reason, or just had difficulty logging in or something. So, but yeah, the On24 platform is significantly more robust. And probably gives far more options to help you control that process and then automate an outcome. Do we have any Q&A? I'm happy to open the lines. We've just got a couple of minutes left. How does Jason let you know there is a question? That's from Kath. Well, Jason will either manage to answer that question or he will, I can see it on screen as well. So I have the Q&A here right in front of me as well. And so I glance at it from time to time, but Jason makes sure that it, as a co-presenter, so as a co-host, so he has the same level of access to see all those controls. Alex asked the question, Derek, can we get a wave from your friend in the green shirt? That's you. Would you like to wave to the audience? There you go. Thank you, Alex. We appreciate the COVID-19 experience here at home. So Alex says thanks. All right. So do we have any other questions that might potentially relate to Eloqua and Zoom? I'm just putting that out there. Well, if not, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you making some time. Hopefully you found the session of value, and thanks again for participating in questions. And we will be in touch with a little bit more information over the coming weeks. We're getting lots of questions from customers. So Adrian, thanks so much also for helping out today. And this session has been recorded, so we will get a copy to you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.